First up is Truth 12. Truth, go ahead and give us an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Hey everyone, go by Truth 12. I've been following the Middle East for a long time, and my background is actually I spent a lot of time reading up on this subject, watching videos, reading books, trying to learn as much as I can, and just very excited to be able to have this discussion. I think it's going to be very productive, very fruitful, and I want to really thank Becton for pulling this together.
No, thank you, Truth. We really appreciate you coming on. Secondly, but certainly not least, is Socrates. Socrates, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks again to Politics and to Becton. I'm Socrates. I've been streaming on Twitch since the pandemic. I love that these kind of alternative spaces where people can really just talk and dialogue and dig into issues. I grew up Jewish, and so I grew up hearing about Israel, hearing different things about Israel and Palestine, and felt like I was propagandized. And getting older and reading more different perspectives and seeing that there was like another side to the story, that's something that I'm always interested to bring into spaces or to people who also only have heard one side or can only really like relate to or empathize with one side. So that's my main interest here.
Well, thanks again to both of you for joining us. A quick formatting note, this debate will have 3 main topics and a conclusion. I'll read out each main topic, then both of you will respectively have time to respond. The equal time rule applies here, and after the second person gives their response, it's up to you guys to continue the discussion. The third topic will be of a dialectic format, but we'll get to that later. As of today, a shaky ceasefire still holds in Gaza amid a war that has killed over 48,000 people since its inception in October of 2023. According to the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, over 40,000 Palestinians have also been displaced in the West Bank area due to recent conflict there as well. So, what do you think of Israel's policies and the current military actions in West Bank and Gaza? How do they shape Palestinian lives for better or worse? Truth 12, you're up first. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Before I get into the answer, I want to parse the question a little bit because I think it's misleading premise a bit. I would also note that nowhere in that question does it talk about the impact on Israelis, but we'll leave that aside for now. So broadly speaking, we kind of have to split up the West Bank and Gaza in terms of what's going on in those respective places because it's a very different situation. West Bank is disputed territory and is basically split up into 3 main zones over which Israel and the Palestinian Authority have varying degrees of control. Gaza is a completely different situation. October 7th, 2023, Hamas, after many years, 17 years of controlling Gaza Strip and having launched many rocket attacks, terrorist attacks, etc. on Israel, launched an act of war. It's not accurate to characterize it as a terrorist attack. It's really an act of war that was launched. Over 1,200 people were killed. Most civilians, many sleeping in their beds or at a music concert. Completely innocent civilians. Really no way to justify it. I actually haven't heard many people really try to justify it because it's impossible to justify. As a result, the war was kicked off by Hamas. Israel retaliated. And since then, the goal has been very simple in Gaza to make sure that Hamas is no longer a threat to Israel. Very simple, hard to achieve, but easy to explain and describe. And in the back and forth, we can definitely go into sort of the details of that military campaign, which I would argue is being fought very justly and in accordance with norms, precedent, international law, etc. We can certainly have an exchange on that. I would welcome that. And the West Bank situation has been different. There's clusters of terror cells across the West Bank. So Israel has had to periodically go in and now is starting to ramp up their efforts there to neutralize those terror cells. But the goal, broadly speaking, right, it is sort of simple, even though the situation is writ large not. Israel's goal is security. It's security for its citizens, much as we would do in the United States if ISIS took over Toronto or Tijuana and began launching numerous attacks into our territory, and we had the equivalent of 2 million people displaced from their homes indefinitely. We would do, frankly, the same, if not a higher caliber military campaign. So the goal is simple: it's restoring security to Israel. It's frankly restoring security to the Palestinians as well, because they're not secure or prosperous under this leadership in Gaza and in the West Bank. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority, which has been sort of the dream of the United States for a long time, that they could sort of be the responsible Palestinian government, has been nothing of the sort. Happy to elaborate on that at length. But I think that's sort of in a nutshell where we are. Second part of the question, how do these policies affect Palestinians positively or negatively? Again, as Joe Biden said, it's a war. People die in war. It's tragic. Wish the war had never started. Personally, I would love nothing more for there to be peace. And most Israelis, I believe, feel that way as well. The history bears that out. Israel has made numerous concessions, engaged in years and years of diplomacy. And what they got to show for it was nothing more than brutal attacks from not only Gaza and the West Bank, I might add, but from Lebanon. We've seen attacks from Yemen. We've seen attacks from Jordan. We've seen attacks from Iraq in terms of missiles. We've seen attacks from Iran itself for the first time ever in a large-scale way. So, yes, Palestinians have been negatively affected by the situation, which, unfortunately, their own leadership caused.
Thank you for that, Truth. And of course, I would like to clarify that, yes, this war was started by a terrorist attack by the Palestinian organization Hamas. Next up, Socrates, your response.
Hi, just for the structure, can I get just a repeat of the question, just so it's framed well?
Yeah, of course. So the question was, just a second. The question was about Israel and Palestine and the conflict. So we went through the statistics of people in Gaza. What do you think of Israel's policies and current military actions in the West Bank and Gaza? How do they shape Palestinian and Israeli lives for better or for worse?
Right, thank you. So the current policy of the Netanyahu government is from the river to the sea. And what they mean by that is from the river to the sea, it will be Israel only, no Palestinians. This is the stated goal of Netanyahu. This is the stated goal of almost everybody in his cabinet, who are saying things like, maybe we should nuke Gaza, we should have a second Nakba, we want to take all this territory. These are the stated positions. These aren't kind of something that you look into and you discover. This is just what they're saying out loud. In terms of Israeli policy for the last number of decades, the three zones or areas A, B, C in the West Bank. Oh no, what are we doing? Are we good? Okay. In terms of those zones, A, B, and C in the West Bank, the West Bank is by international law considered Palestinian territory that is occupied by varying levels by Israel. There are UN resolutions saying that Israel needs to give back this land. It's holding it illegally. When Truthful was talking about terrorist attacks in the West Bank, my first impression in my mind went to that he was going to be talking about Israeli terrorists who have been convicted by Israel, such as Ben-Gvir, who's now running the government. The Palestinians in the West Bank are subject to terrorist attacks, to attacks from settlers who are illegally building in territory that is not theirs, and then destroying things for the Palestinians. For the Palestinians in the West Bank, their territory that they have any control over is shrinking year after year, decade after decade. Military blockades are placed around all of their territories so that to move from, where you live to your grandma's house, you have to go through a military checkpoint that is illegally built. And that grasp over these areas is tightening. It's for control over water. It's for the minority but substantial number of Israelis, something like 8, 12, 15%, who see it as God's will that they take over all of this land with whatever violence or methods are available to them, and they're not interested in the consequences. So this myth that Israel illegally takes land, or that Israel bombs civilians in order to increase security, this is a myth. It's the same myth that we've seen in America, where we looked at Abu Ghraib, the torture prison off of American soil, the black site, so that we can torture people. This has been a cause of a lot of hatred toward us. And it's been cited as a lot of people who have enacted violence against the United States. And it's currently being reopened, but that's a different subject. So the idea that inhumane treatment will lead to more security doesn't seem to be justified by anything that's ever occurred in history. And to say, well, the Palestinians have brought this on themselves, we haven't done anything, when Israel has committed war crimes, such as using white phosphorus on civilian populations, has, in this current conflict, whatever you want to call it, I don't know if a war is a consistent term, given that Palestine is not considered a nation by Israel. I'm not sure how you have a war on a area of land that you blockade and supply or remove electricity and water to. That's a technical term, I'm not sure. But the fact is that, again, stated Israeli military policy is we're not conducting this in a humanitarian manner. We're going to kill as many people as possible. That is the stated by IDF officials, by government officials, high officials, not somebody in some small office somewhere, but the ministers and the Prime Minister Netanyahu, who are running the government, are saying these things openly. I don't know what else it takes other than inhumane illegal actions combined with blatantly saying that we're going to level this place because we don't see them as human and we want to destroy them. I don't know what missing ingredients there are to say that these actions are not justified. So to back up a little bit, I'm not somebody who says that, oh, Israel is an evil settler, colonial, imperial country, nation, and it must be wiped off the map. No, Israel is a nation. It has a right to exist. Okay. Palestinians, including Gazans and people in the West Bank who have lived in their homes for generations, have a right to live in safety and security as well. So the idea that one of these groups of people should have rights to safety and peace and security, and that we should consider what happens to them as relevant, and the other is just a problem to be solved, something to be stamped out. I think that's inhumane, and I don't think that that's ever going to lead to peace.
Thank you, Socrates. Now we'll kind of go into open responses. I know that's a lot to unpack for both of you, but we'll give you both a chance to respond. So Truth, if you want to go ahead and respond to what he said, and then I'll just let it flow into you, Socrates, after that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot. I would say that, one, I think we need to keep this just a broader point about the format of this. I think we need to keep these responses as narrowly hewed to the question that was asked as possible, not delve into something in Iraq that the United States did 20 years ago, or sort of get caught in tangents here. So if we could just narrowly focus it on the question that was asked for the time being, which was, what are Israel's policies and military action in the West Bank and Gaza trying to achieve? Socrates, I think your answer, if I understand it correctly, is the expulsion of Palestinians or subjugation of Palestinians. Am I accurately characterizing your views?
Right. So, I mean, to respond to the first thing you said, the topic was about Israeli policy and its consequences for Palestinians.
Right.
And I think if the argument is that by enacting terror on a population, you will stamp out any kind of response that could be violent, and you will increase the security of your own people, then I think that needs to be justified. My counter to that was by American policy with respect to torture. We don't have to go to some other thing, but I think that needs some kind of justification.
Right, okay, happy to respond to that, but just to go back, right, because I want you to answer the question that I want to respect the format that Becton has set up here. So what do you think Israel's policies are trying to achieve? Is it, as I tried to characterize your views, as the subjugation and eventual expulsion of all Palestinians? I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying.
Sure.
What is Israel's goal?
Yeah. So I don't ever want to totalize an entire nation or an entire people
the government
as only having one thing. But it is a fact that Netanyahu and pretty much top to bottom of his top cabinet members, top ministers, have stated what I think is easily characterized as genocidal intent. Whether you don't think that that's what they are doing, that is what they have stated. I think combining that with the level of destruction that we've seen, and not going to other foreign policy, but just in terms of Israel's past interactions and conflicts with Palestinians, I think there's a reasonable understanding that it's Israeli policy, especially right now, to want to take all of these territories and to push Palestinians out.
Okay.
And not to live side by side as neighbors.
So the goal, right, because this is the question that was asked, and I wrote it out here so we don't have any ambiguity. The question is, what are Israel's policies and military action in the West Bank and Gaza trying to achieve? Your sort of, in a nutshell, answer to that is somewhere between expulsion and genocide, correct? Or one of those
Sure.
two?
And to be very balanced and clear, of course they want to respond to the attack from Hamas, and of course they want to protect their people by removing Hamas as a threat.
Why is that a given? Why is that a given? Why is that a given? If their goal this whole time has been to expel, I guess as you would characterize, Palestinians, although I have to make clear to our audience that there are around, I believe the number is 2 million Arabs that live in Israel, Muslim Arabs that live in Israel that have full citizenship, that in theory could be the prime minister of Israel, that have been on the Israeli Supreme Court, that have entirely equal rights, voting rights, so on and so forth, legal rights within Israel. Putting that aside for a second, although I think it's an important point, why would Israel need to wait till October 7th, 2023, when I'm sure you would agree they're far militarily superior to the Palestinian militant groups? Why do they need to wait until now to do these actions if this whole time this has been their goal?
Right. So the stay on Israel's hand. So first of all, among other things, this current government is built up of people such as people who've been convicted of terrorism by Israel, people who are themselves illegal settlers in the West Bank. This current government is much more extreme. Netanyahu, in order to build a coalition, moved further to the right and brought on more part of the religious Zionist party. So that the government has moved further to the extreme. This isn't what the Israeli government has always been, the stay on Israel's hand from just carrying out a either attacks or ethnic cleansing or genocide. I'm not going to push hard on any particular like terminology or
Well,
classification.
I think we should be clear on our terms. If you think it's
Okay, if you want to go into
genocide
that,
is not the
yeah.
kind of thing where it's usually ambiguous, right? I mean, nobody with a rational mind says we don't know if the Holocaust was a genocide. I mean, I don't think it's
the Armenian genocide, for example, was
no,
not
I think that's pretty
recognized for a
clear.
long
I think
time.
that's a pretty clear one, personally.
It was not recognized for a long time. I mean,
right. There's a lot of reasons, political reasons for that, but
Sure.
few historians dispute the fact that it was a genocide. But anyway, that's retroactively looking at something that happened.
I mean, the ICJ is looking at the charge of genocide.
I'm
right
asking
now.
you. I'm asking you though.
Mhm.
I mean, do you think it's a genocide in Gaza?
I don't know if that's something that could be substantiated. I think it's clearly ethnic cleansing, and that's the stated goal of Israel's top ministers, is to push out the people that live there. I do want to make sure that I answered your earlier question, which I think was an important one, of why isn't Israel just, why don't they just go in and just do this and just be done with it? I think.
Why didn't they do it
question,
5 years ago? Or I mean,
Mhm.
you say that the
Yeah.
Netanyahu government is to blame. Netanyahu has been in power for the better part of almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
So I mean, what
No, it's a very important question. Yeah. So I think the main kind of stay on Israel's hand from doing this is the international community. They aren't entirely subject to the international community. They have the U.S. On the Security Council vetoing resolutions condemning Israeli actions, so they have a fair amount of protection, but they don't want to incur the entire wrath of the entire world all at once, which is changing to be decade after decade more harsh towards Israel's actions by just blatantly doing something like this. They want to get as much support of the international community and their own people as possible. I think that's the kind of mainstay on doing.
I think Becton said the number was 48,000. Do you think Israel's killed 48,000 people in Gaza since October 7th?
To clarify, that's not just Gazans. That's supposed to be everybody, including Israeli casualties.
Thanks. Okay. Whatever the number that you might think it is, I assume you think it's upwards of 40,000, as UN figures have seemingly indicated. Although I would dispute those figures, but I'm asking you.
Sure. I haven't read anything that makes me in particular question those figures now.
So you think that Israel killing, as you say, 45,000 people is makes them look good in the eyes of the international community?
No,
I guess I
don't think it does. No.
In other words, if you're saying the international community is restraining Israel, what I mean, why?
Sure. I can clarify that for sure. Right. So if Israel had killed 40,000 people starting on October 6th, do you think that would change the kind of overall response from the international community? Do you think it would be as mixed?
It's hard to see how the international community could possibly look at Israel favorably in any light if the October 7th act of war basically did not change the calculus whatsoever in terms of the general global sense of Israel. I think frankly that under the surface of this conversation, and it has to be said because it impacts everything you're referencing, the ICJ, the skewed and false numbers of casualties, the pretenses of international law, which are selectively applied or erroneously applied. Under the surface of all of this is a global, and I'm not going to say anti-Semitism because I don't want to go there. And I know that that's a controversial place to go, and I don't want to go there, but certainly anti-Israel bias. There is no country in the history of the world, quite literally, at least since the post-World War II order, that has been held to such a impossible standard of existence and self-defense. And I think that has to be posited first and foremost. If you're asking me, ultimately, what is Israel's goal here? As I said before, I think it's security. That's what their stated intent is, not the whatever cherry pick quotes you may have from some fringe ministers, but the explicit statements of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the days after October 7th, which he's not altered in any way. It's to free the Israeli hostages, which we haven't talked about, and eradicate Hamas as a military power, which has killed numerous hundreds, maybe over 1,000 Israeli citizens, who most of whom were civilians, over the years prior to October 7th. So I think the onus is on you to explain how this is somehow ethnic cleansing or genocide without using the crutch of the ICJ, which is run by people, frankly, who harbor very strong anti-Israel bias. Or if you want to go into the international law, let's go into that. But what exactly is the evidence you have that Israel is engaged in, however you want to characterize it, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide? I mean, where is the evidence of any of that?
Right. So there were a number of things in there. I don't want to. I want to be kind of careful and considerate how we proceed with this, so that we can kind of follow these down in a meaningful way.
One by one. Sure.
Just to start, I didn't 100% understand what your response was when I asked about the how the international community would view the actions of Israel after October 7th, if Israel on October 6th had totally out of nowhere just started bombing Gaza and killed 40,000 civilians, if you think that the response from the international community would be different than having done so in response to October 7th. I didn't 100%.
I'm happy to answer that. So
yeah,
frankly,
please.
Frankly, it's a little hard. Thanks, Bracken. It's a little hard to see how the international condemnation of Israel could be harsher than it is right now. Numerous countries have cut off trade with Israel or military trade with Israel, or have recalled their ambassadors, or have in the private sector numerous NGOs protesting every day to boycott Israeli goods. We have, as you mentioned, a case at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants, which most recently did for Putin, for Netanyahu. In the United States, there's been a literal stated government U.S. policy to restrict weapon sales to Israel. So, I suppose it's possible that there could be an even harsher global backlash against Israel if they did, in a counterfactual, which I can't. I mean, it's hard to address the counterfactual.
Of course, you can't say 100%. But I mean, is it reasonable to conclude that if Israel just started bombing Gaza without October 7th having occurred, that there's probably a number of people and possibly some nations that would look at that very differently. Well, okay, here's a question.
Yeah.
Would you look at it differently? If October 6th, on October 6th, Israel starts bombing Gaza, October 7th never happens, would you look at those actions differently?
Of course.
Okay.
But what point does that prove? I'm not following the
logic. So the basic point I was putting forward is that the reason that Israel, even if they have the ultimate goal, and I want to be really clear that I'm not at all saying that every single Israeli or the totality of everything that Israel stands for is that they're just a bloodthirsty, evil nation that wants to just murder a group of people. That's like, right? That there's a governmental set of actions that can be construed in a certain way. But I want to be really clear that I'm not trying to essentialize Israel as like a genocidal evil.
When we say Israel, we're talking about the government. That's understood.
Okay, yeah. I just want to be clear. But so my point is that even if Israel did want to carry out ethnic cleansing, if they do it without any pretext whatsoever, they get a harsher condemnation. As you just said, you'd probably condemn them. You'd be like, okay, well that seems wrong. I don't know
Of
if it's
course, I mean, if the United
genocidal,
States
whatever.
dropped
It's certainly
an
wrong.
atomic weapon on Japan just out
Without
of the
World War
blue,
II.
I think that
Yeah.
that's self-evident, right?
Right. Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
that was my point, is that you're asking, well, why wouldn't they just do that? And it seems clear that the condemnation would be
Well, no. But
very
the difference-
consistent
the
from
distinction is
everybody.
that I'm arguing that Israel is taking these actions as a matter of security and self-preservation,
Mhm.
and you're arguing that they're doing so as a matter of
Yep.
animosity towards the Palestinians and a desire to see them expelled from, I guess, what you would call the Palestinian territories, what I would call the disputed territories,
Sure.
right?
I would say that it's not 100% just one or the other, but I would say yes. I would say that there's a strong interest in expelling Gazans. And so the question from you, which was a fair one, was, well, why wouldn't they just do it? And I believe that was just answered by what we just walked through of, well, if they just did it, everybody across the world would just condemn them. If they did it after October 7th, then a lot of people wouldn't condemn them. I'm sorry, I don't mean to like take the reins, but just because Becton said there's very little time in this topic.
Sure. Feel free to ask me questions. I don't want to keep.
Oh yeah. Well, I did want to address just one other thing. I don't know if he's telling us that we're okay. 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Cherry picks quotes from like a couple of ministers who are low positions, whatever.
I didn't say low positions. I said fringe.
Fringe. Okay. I mean, like, how, if you had to guess, like, how far down are these people? So in terms of the hierarchy of the government, so there's like Netanyahu at the top, and then there's the people who are appointed as ministers, and then there's people who are like within the coalition that ultimately voted for him. Like, of the top, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 people in the government of ministers, like, what percent of them do you think have said things that sound really outrageous and really?
Honestly, I would
like
rather
genocidal.
do this in a precise way, where we can go quote by quote,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
not make abstractions.
Yeah. Please.
Because
Mhm.
it's important to drill down on these, because actually at the International Court of Justice,
Mhm.
a lot of these quotes were literally used inaccurately to accuse Israel of genocide, and a number of them. So, for example, one quote that's widely circulated is, I believe it was the then defense minister, although I don't remember exactly who said
Was
it.
it the
Frankly,
human animals thing?
said that these people are animals.
Yeah, he was
talking about Hamas.
Mhm.
He was talking about Hamas specifically, and that's clear
Mhm.
from the context in which he was quoted, 100% clear. And at the International Court of Justice, in the most uncharitable way possible, because there is and this is a fact in my opinion, there's an anti-Israel bias across most of the world for reasons we could talk about. Some having to do with, frankly, radical Islam, which we could talk about as well.
Mhm.
And that is sort of the elephant in the room throughout this whole conversation, which I don't want to be a sort of an elephant. I think we should bring it into the conversation because it's an important aspect of this. Those quotes were that quote in particular, for example, was used to accuse Israel of genocidal intent. The quote that was misconstrued as referring to all Palestinians or all Gazans, when it was specifically a quote against Hamas.
Sure. Can I just to see if we can get through a couple of these quickly? Can I share a couple of these and let me know your thoughts? So Avi Dichter, who's the agriculture minister.
Before you start, I just want to make one 10-second caveat.
Sure, please.
That because a minister says something, that doesn't make it official government policy. The minister says something. Yes.
Yeah. So Avi Dichter, agriculture minister, said, "We are now rolling out the Gaza Nakba."
So I didn't hear.
We are now rolling out the Gaza Nakba.
Okay.
Referring
do you have
to
the full quote?
do you
have the full quote in there, or?
We can find it, the larger paragraph but that's not one that you're familiar with as being. And look, I'm not trying to play gotcha.
Yeah.
Whatever.
No, I don't even feel that it's a gotcha if the agricultural minister, who has no influence whatsoever over military policies, says something which, frankly, I do believe was taken out of context, although we have to find the full quote to accurately get the context. But again, I think if we're getting into this level of granularity of picking out quotes that the agricultural minister said and looking at 3 words he said, it disproves your point, frankly, altogether. Because if you had a real ethnic cleansing campaign, if you had a real genocidal campaign, the evidence, you wouldn't need to go and pick a quote from the agricultural minister from whatever, a year and a half ago, after Israel suffered the worst attack on its soil ever, to prove that there's some sort of war crime, or right. You could point to the war crime. You could point to the ethnic cleansing campaign and say, this is proof. You wouldn't need to go and extract a quote from the agriculture minister, who's not an important person in the government, has no control over military policy or any policy other than agricultural subsidies, and say this is proof of genocide or war crimes or what have you. I know Becton wants us to move on, so
Yeah. I mean, I do need to just respond to that, which is that again, if you're going to characterize like what I'm bringing to the table is like, oh, these are kind of like, here and there's some little person in the government that said this thing. This is like, I mean, that was my initial kind of impression. Like, oh gosh, this person in the Israeli government said this horrible thing. That's crazy. But like, I'm sure it's not like lots of people saying stuff like that. And then I looked, and it's like, oh my God, it's everybody. It's almost everybody, like literally of the top like 20 people in the government who are prime minister or ministers. That's just how the government works. They're like, most of them are saying these very kind of like blatantly genocidal sounding things, which of course, as you accurately pointed out, doesn't mean that this is official policy being enacted. The reason that I would even like care about this or look at this is because if there is going to be a loss of human life, a loss of homelands, then I think it's important to try to gather information and act as quickly as possible, so that we're not retrospectively looking, okay, well, now it's very clear 50 years after this happened, this was a genocide or ethnic cleansing. Now we have the kind of historical perspective. The idea is that while it's a little bit, unclear exactly what's going to proceed, we try to gather as much information as possible to try to head off disaster.
I don't need to get the last word here.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to do a gotcha, but just for the next segment or whatever, if we're going to say genocide or ethnic cleansing, or even that there's a possibility of that, we have to define those terms and get into concrete evidence. And I don't think our audience would accept a statement from the agricultural minister. If there's 20 statements, as you said, let's go through them. Let's go through them and link them to the actual facts on the ground, right? Because in the aftermath of 9/11 or any sort of major attack, people are going to make statements, and that's natural and fair. And we have to actually see what is happening in Gaza on the ground. I want to talk about that in the next segment, but I know Becton wants us to shut up. That's all I want to say.
I have a response I feel is important to that, but I can let it go.
Go ahead, Socrates.
Well, I mean, just because you brought up the statements that were made in the aftermath of 9/11, because of those sentiments from American politicians, the American people, we invaded Iraq under the pretense that maybe they attacked us or maybe they had weapons of mass destruction, which were lies, and we caused the deaths of 100,000.
Not lies. But let's not go there.
Wait.
Let's not go there.
We caused the deaths of 100,000, maybe 1 million people. We occupied that territory for a really long time. We opened Abu Ghraib, where we tortured people, and those were all wrong. And so I see those things as very parallel. Maybe some other time we can extend the conversation further for this talk. We'll keep it. Yeah.
Sure. Just for the audience's purpose, let's stick to Israel. Sure. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to move on to the next kind of major topic, which is another thorny issue of this conflict is refugees who have left Israel, either voluntarily or involuntarily, since its 1948 founding. Many of them have expressed desires to return, but obviously, as a modern country, Israel has borders and immigration rules and won't let them permanently back in. So the topic is, why should or shouldn't Palestinian refugees have a right of return to Israel as part of a solution to this conflict? Socrates, you're up first.
Sure, thank you. I think this is a very complicated issue. There are millions of Palestinian refugees. Some of these are directly people who have been expelled from Israel. Some of these are children of those people. But the current standard is myself as a Jew, I have a right of return to Israel. I can come to Israel and I can gain citizenship and I can live there and I'm welcomed. My ancestry in terms of Israel, you have to go back probably a couple thousand years. Maybe there's some part that's a little bit sooner. But to say that I should have that right, and people who either have lived there for generations, or maybe their parents were expelled, that they simply just shouldn't have that right because that right doesn't make any sense, or I think the idea that they don't have that right needs very extreme justification. In terms of politically speaking, when right of return has been historically negotiated, this is something that's obviously people who were expelled or people who are children of people who are expelled, they would love to go back to their family home, the place that either they grew up or their parents grew up in the village that they grew up in. But the concession that that Palestinian Authority, other groups have made is to say, okay, I mean, we understand that there's territory that is part of Israel proper, so part of the internationally recognized borders of Israel, and if it's in there, we don't necessarily expect that to happen. It's what we want in our hearts, but we're willing to accept moving into a Palestinian territory that's within the area of the places that they lived. And with this comes the right to self-government and to be able to reside, within the entire areas that are internationally recognized as, for example, the West Bank. But this is something that is going to be solved as a political issue. But from a human rights perspective, I don't see any reason that Palestinians wouldn't have the same kind of rights that I have.
Very simple. I'll keep it short for once. Very simple. My grandmother was expelled from Austria in the 1930s in the lead up to the Holocaust. Does she, or do I, for that matter, have a right of return to Austria? That's not a trick question. I don't, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any good reason that you shouldn't. Obviously, there's political questions around.
I don't think I should have the right to return to Austria, just in the same way that the 60,000 or 80,000 Jews that were expelled from Libya in the 1940s should have right to go back to Libya, or the 70,000 Jews that were expelled from Yemen should have right to go back in the 1940s. Completely ignored by everyone nowadays, by the way. Should have right to go back to Yemen and dispel people from their villages and radically change the makeup of population centers in Yemen. That's not how history works, right? People's children, let alone people's children and grandchildren, people themselves don't have some sort of broad generic human right. It would be great if they did, but they don't, to go back to a war zone when the facts on the ground have materially changed. Now you're talking about 2 generations after the fact. According to some sources, there's 9 million Palestinian refugees, none of whom have ever stepped foot in the Middle East for the most part, or maybe they went there to visit, but they have no connection other than something that happened 2 generations prior. That's absurd. So you're talking about, this so-called right of return, right? What you're really talking about, Socrates, is 5, 6, 7 million people moving to a country where there's only 8 or 9 million people there in the first place, completely upending the whole, assuming there's even room for them, which there's not, completely upending the whole, not only economy, but the whole political situation. So I don't see where you get this generic human right of return from, or if you're selectively applying it to Israel, why you selectively apply it to Israel? Just not how the world works.
Yeah, yes. So I recognize that a lot of people lack that right in the same way that that there's a lot of Americans who lack the kind of fundamental rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that these are concepts, these are ideals that we as humanity push for. But is that something that is just okay? This is, the world is a tough place. This a lot of people are lacking this, or do you actively think that people just like shouldn't have this right?
I think that there is no reason to think this is in any way possible. Not that there's anything wrong with it in the abstract, because it's a fine idea that everyone can magically go to wherever their grandparents were expelled from, or live there, or get citizenship there. That's a fine idea. Just so happens to be impossible.
So
Yeah.
when you say impossible,
Yeah. Do you think it's possible for, if they wanted to, let's say they don't want to for the most part, but if 5, 6, 7 million people, most of whom weren't even alive in 1948, wanted to move to Israel and become Israeli citizens, you think that there should be you think that should be something that's actionable, or something that should be implemented? I mean, I don't see how that.
No, I don't.
Think that.
I don't think that's actionable, or that.
How many Palestinian refugees do you think? What's your definition of Palestinian refugee? Let's start there.
I don't have a really strong opinion on whether refugee status should apply to only the people who themselves directly were expelled versus their like first generation or second gen. I don't have a really strong feeling on if there's like a clear place that should be cut off. But just to clarify, I don't think most people are, when I'm talking about kind of Palestinian right of return, are talking about gaining Israeli citizenship. Most the Palestinian Authority, most Palestinian groups recognize that Israel is almost certainly never, 99.999% chance, never going to accept millions of Palestinians gaining suddenly Israeli citizenship.
That is what the Palestinian Authority. That is the Palestinian Authority position, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean that's been something that in prior negotiations
they've demanded. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, as a starting negotiation thing.
Just so we have the facts clear.
Yeah.
In the height of the most promising negotiations that there ever were, the Oslo Accords, that was a core Palestinian demand, and not only that, a sticking point, which showed that this is not really about land, which it's not. It's really about, ultimately, is Israel going to exist in the form that it does as a Jewish state and a place where Jews can go to be safe from persecution, which the Palestinian Authority didn't want then and doesn't want now. And the right of return so-called issue proves it, actually.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So I don't agree with that, but I don't know if it's going to be fruitful for us to spend the whole topic discussing what does the Palestinian Authority think. I think we're here right now. I don't advocate or think that it's likely that Palestinian refugees, either people themselves or first generation, etc., are likely to gain Israeli citizenship status. I don't think that's likely going to occur, and that's not something that
the question wasn't whether it's likely or not. It's whether. Sorry, I wrote these all out so we can get the exact.
Yeah, please, no. I appreciate
that. Should they have the right?
Yeah, I mean, at an abstract human level, I think at the very least the people who themselves were expelled from their homes should have the right to go back there. But that's not something that I'm personally like pushing for or arguing for.
That's the question, right? Isn't that the question we're addressing?
I mean, I think we're free to interpret right of return any way we want to have a productive conversation, right?
How do you? I mean, we could say that, but how do you interpret it? I mean, in the abstract, sure, anything goes in the abstract, but in the real world, right? What should happen in your opinion with these people, most of whom were not alive in 1948, many of whom's parents were not alive in 1948, and they may live in LA or Switzerland.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't see how there's a ingrained right that in any way impacts reality or would impact
I mean,
reality.
I have that. So I didn't want to like jump back. And these are kind of two like separate, slightly separate subsections. So I didn't want to kind of confuse like where we're heading down which rabbit holes. But I have that right to Israel to return, and I'm not, you know, 1 generation away, 2 generations away, 3 generations away, 4, 5, 6, 10
Yes,
generations away.
that's
I'm
this is
hundreds
an
of
important
generations
distinction.
away.
It's an important distinction. It's an actual incredibly important distinction where you're making a logical fallacy by conflating two things. One is whether you have refugee status of any sort, right? Refugee status is not some nice term where we can sort of come to an agreement on what it means. It's defined by the UN, right? It's defined by the UN in one way for all people across the world, except for the Palestinians, right? This is a fact. Anyone could fact check me
Sure,
on
that's
this.
fine.
And define
yeah.
a different way, and
Mhm.
define a different way for Palestinians, right? So
Sure.
there are actually two separate UN refugee agencies, one for all refugees across the entire world, except for Palestinians, and one for Palestinian so-called refugees who are not refugees under any recognizable status. Now, you say as a Jew you have a right to go to Israel and be a citizen. That's true.
Yes.
That's true. I'm also Jewish. I also have that right.
Mhm.
It has nothing whatsoever to do with refugee status. Anything that happened in
Sure, that's
1948 or in any war. That's a product of Israel being a state for Jews to flee from persecution. Okay? Which there's been a lot of, as everyone knows, over
Mhm.
the years, including right now, by the way.
Mhm.
So you're making a big conflation there, and we have to be precise with our terms and our
I don't
arguments.
think I'm making that conflation.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
you
not
are, because
stating
you said that Palestinians have the right. They don't have the right, but Jews do, which is a complete misrepresentation of the facts.
Okay. I, as a person who you would have to go very far back in my ancestry to find my ancestors who lived in the geographic region of Israel, either, you know, Israel, the borders, or Israel, kind of that region. You'd have to go back really, really far. And I have that right. People who either themselves are from there or their parents, grandparents, whatever, were from there who are Palestinian do not have that right. Look, I'm not trying to say that there's no reason or this is just like just racism or something, right? I'm not trying to simplify the issue. I'm just stating that those are facts as they stand, right? I'm not trying to jump from there any further, but just those are.
I'm not accusing you of deliberately mixing this up, but for our audience, it will be easy to mix up, because unless we state the facts in a clear way, which I'm trying to do, it will be conflated.
It's a difficult issue.
And it's important to highlight the fact that there's an agency called the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA,
yeah.
which was set up, and this is, anyone can look this up. It's very simple to find, to be a temporary agency that would fold in a matter of a few years. This was in 1949. Okay, so now we're down the pipe. Over 70 years later, it's still around, and it still applies the definition of refugee to someone whose grandparent or great-grandparent, or in 20 years, or 100 years, or 200 years, great-great-great-great-grandparent, that person, a descendant 5-6 generations down the pipe, will be considered a Palestinian refugee. And herein lies the problem of talking about the quote, right of return. Because if someone thinks now or in 100 years that 10, 15, 20 million Palestinian refugees can return and live in Israel or anywhere in the Palestinian, in disputed territories in Israel, anywhere, look at a map. Look at a map. Israel is smaller than New Jersey. Okay? So this is we could talk in the abstract world about this concept, but in the real world, it's a total impossibility. That's my opinion.
So this is a little bit tough, because the two points that you, I I think are most compelled by, I'm least compelled by with respect to this topic of whether, so for me, the refugee status itself is not a critical issue that I rest my hat on, and the relation of
Can I just say
refugee
why? Can I
status.
just say why it is? Can I just say why I think it is?
Yeah, I think I know why, but
the right of
yeah.
return, specifically in all frameworks in diplomatic negotiations,
Mhm.
the United Nations, is applied to people with refugee status, Palestinian refugees. So the term, the definition of that term matters a lot to figure out who fits in that category, right?
With respect to
If,
right of, yeah.
if
So
it was
that's the
60,000
second thing.
if there was 60,000 people,
Uh-huh.
that I think the number is 60 or 70,000 people that were expelled in 1948, or more likely than not, actually fled on their own volition. That's a different story, in my opinion. 60,000 versus 7, 8, 9 million, right? Go ahead.
Right. So that's the second thing, is that to me, I don't connect refugee status as being the thing that grants that right. I understand that there's
What does?
institute. So are we talking about like morally or politically? So for me, the fact that like you live there, your family lived there, your ancestors live there, your children live there. It's not a 100% absolute right. If there's like financial situations that change and make it so you can't afford to live there, I don't know. But if organized violence pushes you out, in the way that you're talking about violence towards Jews. My family left Ukraine because of pogroms.
Should they be granted
Should there
Ukrainian
be
citizenship? Should your children be granted Ukrainian citizenship, or
I
their
don't
children?
I don't think it's I don't see why it's such an absurd, laughable idea that should happen, especially when I have that for Israel, where my family hasn't lived for a couple thousand years.
Okay, I know we want to wrap this up.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with refugee status or
Exactly.
the fact that no, because we coming back to this, because you're linking this with your right of return as a Jew in Israel. That has nothing to do whatsoever with any war that was ever fought regarding Israel or anything other than the fact that Israel serves as a sanctuary for Jews to be free from persecution across the world. Okay, if you're saying that everyone in the world, in theory or in practice, or however you want to put it, should have a right to get citizenship for any country where someone in their family lived 200 years ago, I do think that's insane. Personally,
Well,
I know Becky wants us to move on.
What about 1 year? So let's try to find out where our actual kind of like differences lie. Yeah.
I wouldn't make a generalization like that. I think you're acting like citizenship is this kind of thing where you can just willy-nilly throw it around. I don't actually, and there's a lot of things that come with citizenship, including in a lot of countries, social welfare programs, legal
Sure.
rights.
And again, I'm not talking about coming to Israel. I'm talking about coming to a Palestinian state. We'll probably end up talking about that maybe in a topic or two. But
sure.
Right, but just to clarify, again, I'm not talking about Palestinians, whatever that however generations that expands out. If that's 60,000 people, 1 million people, I'm not talking about those people gaining Israeli citizenship.
You're talking about being Palestinian citizens, right?
Palestinian citizens.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would encourage anyone to look at a map of the West Bank when trying to factor that into their thinking about this. But go ahead, Becton.
Sure. Thanks, guys, for the spirited discussion. So to switch things up a little bit, we're going to go ahead and move on to a new question in the form of a Socratic dialectic. So to explain that a little bit, I'm going to ask an initial, neutral question that Truth is going to respond to. And then this really is designed to find common ground among certain issues. So Socrates is going to ask a few questions of Truth to kind of dig into his argument. Truth will give him short responses to that. And then the roles will switch. Socrates will answer the initial question, and Truth will ask questions of him to dig in further and refine it. If it sounds complicated, don't worry about it. Just watch along, and it'll quickly become pretty clear. And the real guiding factor is we're going to try to keep the initial responses fairly short, 2 to 3 minutes, so you can ask questions and respond to it a little quickly. So, Truth, how should countries and more broadly everyday people in other states respond to this conflict? Should they support and arm Israel more? Should they work on a neutral diplomatic solution? Should they put pressure on Israel to settle? Give us your take.
Yeah, thanks. I will keep this brief because I think we want to get into more of a dialogue. But I obviously think people should support Israel. No surprise there. Not every single policy or every single statement, but Israel's right to self-defense and to exist. Yes. But more practically, actually, for the United States, where I live and am a citizen of, I think people should try to stay out of it. Actually, I think that people, it's not a dig at Socrates or anybody, but a lot of people have opened their mouths on this topic without knowing too much. We could probably all agree on that. And I actually think people would be in a better posture to learn and listen than jump to a gut reaction. Because what we're seeing on our universities right now is people quite literally at my alma mater storming buildings, university classroom buildings, and taking janitors hostage over this issue, which they don't understand. So, we all want peace. I want peace. The question is, how do you get there?
Yeah, this is the kind of topic where even for something like this where we're organizing a dialogue or debate or whatever's happening here, the first question when you're trying to pair people off is, are you pro-Israel or are you pro-Palestine? Right? And so the framing of so much of the way that we talk about just like what's happening is like the zero sum. This person wins and they get what they want and annihilates the other group, or this group gets what they want and annihilates the other group. And for me, as somebody who is Jewish, and my grandparents were massive supporters of Israel and believe very strongly in Israel as a safe place. They were a little bit more like atheistic, so they weren't so strong on kind of the God's promised land, but as a safe place for Jews, they're very strong on that. And I believe in that very strongly. And at the same time, I have very strong Jewish values that were instilled in me. Every Passover, we talk about the history, whether it's apocryphal or not, of Jews being slaves in Egypt and leaving and being free and founding their own nation. And we're asked to talk about and think about who are the people who are not free right now.
I just want to make a quick point. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Yeah, please.
There are Jews, and I know that you know this, I don't know if our audience does, who are slaves in Gaza right now, as we speak, at the hands of Palestinian terrorists, backed by Iran, Turkey, and Qatar to the tune of billions. So people should not look at this as an Israeli-Palestinian issue. This is a democracy in Israel, a free democracy with its problems, like all countries, but a free democracy up against a ring of terror around it. I think that framing has been lost throughout a lot of this conversation. Partially my fault for not bringing it into more fine-tuned clarity. But I think we have to be clear about what is actually going on here. Israel has made numerous concessions for peace, and its enemies, unfortunately, do not want peace. And I'll just leave it at that. So go ahead.
So can I ask, when you think about this topic and the advocacy that you want to do to the extent that here in something like this, stating your opinion, trying to get people to think properly about this topic, do you feel like the side of the kind of like needs and pains of Israelis are generally not represented, and the needs of Palestinians and the kind of like way to empathize and kind of humanize the Palestinians is like very present? Is that your kind of impression of what this is like in the world, or kind of where things are in conversation?
I just want to clarify. Can you just be more specific about like in the Western media, in
Sure. Say society around you. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of ways to answer that. If it's like, what do people think in Europe? But say people in your community, people who you're friends with, people that you were talking to, people in your university or alma mater, maybe not when you were there. Um, but like, I guess, what's your sense generally of the level of humanization, or maybe this is the question. Do you feel like Palestinians are too humanized?
no,
No? Okay.
no.
Do you feel like there's more work that needs to happen to humanize Palestinians more? Or do you feel like it's
I think Palestinians have gotten, um, again, broadly speaking, um, they've been treated as victims throughout this entire thing, which, don't get me wrong, many of them are. Most did not ask for this outcome, which is certainly not one that I really strongly believe Israel did not want. It's not good for Israel to have this outcome. That's obvious, and I think that if you think that Israel is led by smart people, as I do, you should reason from that they did not want this outcome, that they did not in any way seek this outcome. There's still a lot that we haven't even talked about the whole entire war that Israel's fought with Hezbollah and Lebanon. We haven't talked about Iran literally launching hundreds of missiles at Israel in one night, multiple times throughout this conflict. I mean, but if you want to specifically focus on the Palestinians in Gaza, I assume is your question. I think that they've been treated as basically hapless victims that are divorced entirely from the Hamas situation. Many Palestinians are good people that want peace, but there is a fact of history here, which is that in 2006, the Palestinians in Gaza voted Hamas into power. That's a fact. And it's not like a mystery of what Hamas was or what it stood for, right? Hamas itself is an acronym in Arabic that stands for the Islamic Resistance Movement. Okay, resistance against what? Okay, Israel, obviously. It's a group that is, by definition, a terrorist organization. And if you're asking me on the media side how this is being covered, I think it's being covered horribly and inaccurately, and treating the Palestinians as hapless victims who have no agency whatsoever, which I find on their behalf actually offensive. They do have agency, and they are human beings just like anybody else who can make rational decisions. And it just so happens that the decisions that some, not saying most or the majority, that some made led to this outcome, which has not been good for them, but which unfortunately was necessary to bring peace, whatever that means to everyone. Obviously, we're not there yet, but to start to bring peace to some degree to the region, not just for Israel. Everyone should look up what was going on in the region before this happened. Israel made peace with the United Arab Emirates. They made peace with Bahrain. These are 99%, 98, 99% Muslim majority countries. This is not about Judaism and Islam. This is about the radical Muslims who used their religion as a weapon to attack Israel, and specifically civilians, time and time again. So I hope that answers your question to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like conceptually or concretely it's possible to advocate for Palestinians, either Gazans or Palestinians in the West Bank, without being anti-Israel or without like wanting to destroy Israel, or without wanting to Israel to be without security? Is that like a conceptually possible position, or concretely possible?
Yeah, sorry, can you just repeat the question? I want to get the exact. I'm sure I heard
Can
exactly
you
right.
is it like a sensible kind of coherent thing to talk about advocating for the human rights or well-being of Palestinians, whether that's Gazans or Palestinians in the West Bank or kind of Palestinians as a whole, without being anti-Israel or wanting to destroy Israel
Of course.
or wanting Israel to be without security.
Of course.
What would that kind of advocacy look like? Like if you
Living in peace, this is the dream that
Mhm,
successive Israeli left, center, and right
mhm,
administrations have pursued.
mhm,
I would encourage anyone watching this to go look up who was the prime minister of Israel in 2005 when Israel withdrew not only its troops, but every last Jewish person from Gaza.
mhm.
And it was not a left-wing government. It was Ariel Sharon, a right-wing leader. This has been tried. Israel has made, I can go into it, but I don't even need to. Anyone can go search it up. The numerous efforts Israel has made to make peace, and I do mean numerous, dating back decades, literally. Unfortunately, again, it takes two to tango, right? So you can't unilaterally get peace. Peace requires you and your enemy to agree that you want peace, which has not happened.
Mhm. Do you understand the perspective, whether or not you agree, but do you understand the perspective of people who look at what's happening in the West Bank, where settlements are expanding, outposts are built, some of them are demolished and ordered to be rescinded by Israel, and some of them are upgraded to settlements, and the areas that Palestinians can either live on period or have like real control over and can move through without checkpoints, that those areas year after year, decade after decade are shrinking. If you
I'm sorry. That the premise is already false.
Oh,
But
okay.
here's your question. Yeah, go ahead.
um Interesting. So you feel like there are not more settlements being built, or territory is not like pushing further encroachment into the West Bank.
It's not. This is a common misconception that I'm glad we can dispel because it's true that if you look at it in a technical sense, Israelis more houses are being built for Israelis in the West Bank. That's true. But in the vast majority of cases, and I can pull up specific towns where this is happening and places where this is happening. It's are Israeli villages, Jewish villages, where there are already a few thousand people living, and there's housing units being built in those villages. In literally, I believe none of these cases, from my understanding, is land actually being extracted from Palestinian Muslim villages, right? So yes, you're right. There are more houses being built, although even Netanyahu 10 years ago froze all new construction in the West Bank for a year at Obama's request, which shows that this is not some sort of intransigent, obnoxious, stubborn government as some may think. In fact, it's a very cooperative government, contrary to public opinion all over the world. And in fact, if you look at the demography of the West Bank, the number of Palestinian Muslims that are the birth rate is soaring, and there's certainly far outnumber the number of Jews that live in the West Bank. So if this is some kind of colonial power grab or land grab, it's going very poorly for Israel.
So like what are there time spans that this is increased? Like, yeah, this is very far off from my
Yeah,
understanding of what's
yeah.
happened.
And most people's
And
understanding, which is wrong. Yeah.
right, I mean,
I think I'm going to get the chance to ask you some questions. So
yeah, please.
we'll stay on the same vein.
Mhm.
What is your impression of what's happening in the West Bank in terms of the settlements,
Yeah.
in terms of what you're discussing right now?
My impression is that over the last, say, I don't know, five decades or so, the number of settlements has pretty steadily increased. It's not like, obviously government to government, time period to time period,
The number of housing units has increased.
sure,
Number of housing units. Yeah, it's an
Mhm.
important distinction. Again, we have to be precise here.
Well,
housing
if
units.
you ask me, then I'll give my.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, so there's right. So there's. I mean, there. I don't think we're talking entirely in different universes. There's like a zone very very close to like the Israel West Bank border that a lot of settlements have been built on that are like this very. It's a pretty like it's a strip that doesn't go far into the West Bank, and a lot of settlements are being built along there so that they're not pushing far into the West Bank, and that's certainly better than like more settlements deeper in. But there are outposts that are built in the middle of the West Bank, and some of those are upgraded to settlements. I think I have some specific ones written down.
I don't know if there's a question in there, but right off the bat, I'll just give my perspective. So first of all, in using the term settlements, there's an implicit suggestion of, I guess, colonialism.
No. I mean, these are just like the Israeli terms. Outpost
Well,
is like an illegal.
The Hebrew word is shtachim,
Okay.
which Israelis use to refer to towns all throughout Israel and in the West Bank. The term settlement is used usually in the Western press to suggest that there's some form of illegitimacy.
They're on land that the United Nations says cannot legally be occupied by Israel.
Well, okay, so I don't.
But the distinction between outpost and settlement is with respect to Jewish law. I'm sorry, Israeli law.
Yeah, but whether you want to use the term outposts, settlements.
There's a legal distinction in Israel between those two things.
What is that?
So outposts are like recognized by Israel as illegal.
Can I clarify something for you?
Yeah,
because you're somewhat right, but ultimately you're wrong. Okay, when these things are characterized as illegal, when you call outposts, they are units that are constructed without Israeli government permits.
Sure. Yeah.
I have to finish this. This is such an important.
No, point. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, that goes for Palestinian Muslims. I think back to okay. Do I have to stop?
No, you're good. We'll move on in 1 minute.
I learned to finish this point because it's such a misunderstood one. When someone constructs a series of houses in what you call the West Bank, I have a different term for it, but what you call the West Bank, those are constructed units without Israeli building permits. So when a Palestinian does that, Israel demolishes it. When a Jew does it, Israel demolishes it. That's why it's illegal. Just like in the United States.
Yeah.
If I went down the road here and I built a house without my state authorizing it, that's against the law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Palestinian concerns, a Palestinian territory, Palestinian sovereignty. It's a neutral construction zoning question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when people say that these are outposts that have been built in the way far deep in the West Bank to obstruct a Palestinian state, that's not true.
Well, so when you say that's not true, you mean like none of the people who go there and do that are doing so because they want to push the borders of Israel out there?
That may be the case of some individuals who are doing this.
That's the people who are going and doing that, right?
Sure. But the policy of the Israeli government, which is I think what matters at the end of the day, is not to permit that. It's not to permit that. It's in fact illegal to do so, as you know, as you said correctly.
So the outposts are by definition. Look, when I said illegal, I mean exactly the same thing.
If someone did that right next to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. It's not a question of geography.
You didn't get a permit. Yeah, you can't build there. Yeah,
it's a question of zoning authority.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
The whole thing with these outposts is broadly misunderstood, and I think you also, if I can say so, misunderstood it as well.
I don't think we disagree on this.
Yeah. But it's the point of emphasis that we disagree on.
Okay.
Because I'm emphasizing it for a certain reason. When someone goes and builds an outpost in the West Bank, Jewish, Arab, or Christian, if they don't have a permit, it will be destroyed. There is no Israeli government policy of permitting these outposts, or if you want to call them settlements or whatever you want to call
Well,
them.
no. Settlements and outposts are legally distinct within Israeli law.
No.
No?
Yeah, again, no. Only to the extent of what I'm saying. Only to the extent of what I'm saying. A settlement is
They're not
is
legally distinct
valid-
within Israeli law.
in the same way that a house that's built with a permit and a house that's built without a permit have
That's a legal
different
distinction, right?
Yeah, that's the whole.
If you build in a
distinction.
public park, they're they're not going to say, okay, well, here you
Right.
go, live there.
That's the point. But that's
Right.
the point.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with geography. It has nothing to do even with politics. It's a neutral zoning question. So we don't have to keep going in circles on here, but I think the
Yeah.
audience understands.
So do you recognize that some of those outposts, again,
sure. you
whatever
use
the
that
terminology,
term.
yeah.
Use that term, yeah.
Some of those outposts, are you aware that some of those outposts get upgraded to settlements, that they become legally recognized as an area that can continue to be like a housing zone for Israelis who build there?
That is extraordinarily rare. That is extraordinarily rare. If you have examples,
yeah.
I'd be more than happy. I'd
Yeah.
be more than happy to talk through them.
Mhm.
That is exceedingly rare. In most cases, when you're talking about a settlement in the West Bank, these are villages where Israeli Jews have lived for decades in territory which is disputed. Right, the West Bank is disputed territory.
Yep.
It's not occupied territory. I'm glad we have some agreement on that because not everyone agrees about that. It's disputed territory, and it's not
I don't know if I
military. Okay, well, I posit that it's disputed territory.
If you wanted to take the last bit of time to ask me some questions,
Sure.
I'd be happy to make sure that you have a chance for that. I don't have offhand the percent of outposts, but yeah, 89 of 196 were built from 1919 onwards.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that because a lot of people dispute that there were Jewish communities in the West Bank prior to Israel existing. But as you rightly said,
sorry,
yeah.
2019. Did
Okay,
I say?
2019,
Did I say 19? No,
but
sorry, but
yeah, but just to be
2019.
clear,
Yeah,
even there might have been a Freudian
This is a
slip
very
because
recent-
there were Jews, for example, living in Hebron
yeah, for sure.
100 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
there, yeah.
Yeah, but there, yeah, I mean, there's a number of these outposts that have become. We could try to find some stats if we do.
I'm not interested in stats. If you have name one, right? Name one.
So,
Sure.
if you guys, just for some context, in 2012, there were 10 Israeli outposts that were retroactively legalized, but that does seem to be a small minority of the total.
Yeah, I said exceedingly rare. I didn't say never happened. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, if there's a, I don't know. We can go into characterizing what that is. I don't know that it's so necessary. But if you had burning questions
10,
for me,
10 outposts where Beckton, I don't know if you have the numbers. I can't imagine more than a couple thousand people, at most in each. Right. I want our audience to understand what the context is why this is so important, right?
mm-hmm.
People are accusing Israel or Israelis or what have you of changing the facts on the ground by setting up villages deep in the West Bank, which some people call Palestinian territory. I do not. It is not actually under.
I'm curious. You mentioned that you had another name for the West Bank. If you don't mind sharing, I'm just curious what that is. But
so let's get some history in here before I answer the question. So the West Bank is a term that arose about 100 years ago because it's referring to the western bank of the Jordan River. This is actually when the United Nations and specifically Great Britain were going to divide up the entire area, which now includes Jordan as well, for Jews to live. And so at one point there was consideration of all of Jordan being a Jewish state, and the Jews actually turned it down for the sake of peace. But that's a bit of an aside. The bottom line is that for hundreds, actually thousands of years, Jews have called it Judea and Samaria. So that is what I call it. You can use, I find with the term West Bank, it's just not what I personally call it. A lot of the history is purposefully being erased for political reasons. And that's hence the reason of why I don't prefer the term West Bank. The most important thing I'll say about this, and then we can move on, Beckton, is that I want to really emphasize to our audience that the West Bank is not occupied territory. It's disputed territory. That's including under international law. When a foreign country invades you and you fight them off and take back territory, that's not called occupied territory. That's called the border shifted during a war of self-defense.
Wait, that's
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we'll get into the next
Yeah,
topic. So
let's move
back to
on.
nuclear design. But I mean, that's absolutely just, it's one of like the main premises of like the 20th, 21st century is that you cannot take territory in war. This is like one of the fundamental things that we learned for World War I, World War II, is that you just can't take.
Not about taking territory. I didn't say taking territory. I said the borders shift in the course of war. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Becton.
Sure, yeah. So we'll go ahead and move on to the conclusions, concluding statements of this. I did want to add a tiny bit of context. I looked it up and I found that there were approximately 94, 96 outposts in 2012. So 10 of that is probably a pretty small number. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on to the conclusion. To wrap things up, I wanted to ask each of you to, in 3 minutes or so, imagine the future. What do you think a realistic, and you can be a little idealistic, but I do mean mostly realistic, end game for Israel and Palestine will look like in a decade or two? Will there be some sort of foreign reconstruction of Gaza like the Trump or Arab plans suggest? Two-state coexistence, one-state solution, or something else entirely? Socrates, you're up first.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of questions embedded in this. So there's, what do I think is the most likely course of action, which is, is always has the potential to be something really horrific and scary. There's what I would advocate for, what I advocate for in terms of what I think is moral and legal is also something that I think is very achievable, which is that the Palestinians are people. They have a right to self-determination. They have a right to peace and safety and security, just like the Israelis do. And so when it comes to the logistics of what that looks like, there's been a plan in place for this for a long time now. And the UN has put forth a number of resolutions that says that the land of the West Bank and Gaza belong to Palestinians, and in order to deal with the fact that there are some amount of settlements, some amount of land that is currently under the control of Israelis, in order to not have to uproot everybody who's Israeli, who's living there, that you can do some land swaps so that you normalize out what the total area of West Bank versus just over the border of West Bank into Israel proper, that you normalize out that area, and you figure out how to make this this zone that is now a little bit cut up into something kind of like functional and contiguous as an area of land, and then you have some kind of highway, something connecting Gaza and West Bank. This has been the basic premise of what this looks like. And so Palestinians have a state, Israelis have a state, Palestinians vote in Palestine, Israelis vote in Israel. Palestinians probably a lot, as are the case now, go and work in Israel until Palestinian economy picks up more. But between the large number of civil engineers that make up the body of the Palestinian body politic, the large number of civil engineers who are really good at building lots of buildings very quickly, and the ability to bring in aid and then materials from lots of people across the world who see a lot of solidarity and interest in Palestinians just being a successful, prosperous, happy nation. I think we'll do a lot to help Palestinians rebuild and to build into a safe, nice place. And there's a huge amount of animosity, both politically and personally, between the Israeli and the Palestinian people. Whatever you think, whoever's fault you think ultimately it is that these two people have been in conflict for a long time, they have been hurting each other during the course of that. And so there's a lot of pain on both sides. There are grassroots attempts to try to build understanding of children learning together who are Palestinian and Israeli, doing art together, working together, living together. That's the kind of thing that it's going to take to help mend the pain that does exist on both sides. There's a lot of people who say Palestinians can never be anything other than violent, retributive, wanting to kill Israelis more than wanting to protect their own children. I think this is not a characterization we would accept of really any other group of people. And the idea that while Palestinians are in political limbo and do not have basic human rights, that we're going to say that they can never be peaceful while they're currently I think we can agree in a pretty neutral manner to say that they're extremely restricted. So the 50% of Palestinians that are 18 years old or under have been under a blockade for their entire lives, have never been able to leave the area of Gaza. That's a very restrictive environment. And to think that more freedom and hope and opportunity to simply build a beautiful home, that's not going to mend a lot of the pain. It's not going to mend all of the pain, but to think that that's not going to make a difference, I think is not realistic.
Great. Thank you, Socrates. I'll repeat the question again, Truth, just so you have it. I wanted to ask each of you to imagine the future. What do you think a realistic or maybe slightly idealistic endgame for Israel and Palestine will look like in a decade or two? Is there going to be a foreign reconstruction like the Trump plan, or two-state coexistence, one state, something else entirely? Tell us what you think, Truth.
Yeah, thank you, Socrates, and thank you, Becton, for setting this up and giving all your time. I could go for another hour. I know people are getting tired, but hope that you'll have me back. Very, very briefly, I surprisingly don't have the answer to the question that's been befuddling leaders and diplomats for 70 plus years. Unfortunately, I do want to say three quick things. And again, I wish I had more time because there were some, unfortunately, highly inaccurate things that were said in the closing remarks of Socrates. But very briefly, I will say that this notion of Palestinians not having opportunities or being heavily restricted, lacking economic mobility or opportunities for economic mobility. Unfortunately, there is a kernel of truth there because of the corrupt nature of the Palestinian Authority and the overtly corrupt and terroristic nature of Hamas. But in fact, Israel has made enormous strides to give the Palestinians economic opportunities. Tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of work permits given to Palestinians, including in Gaza, which Socrates just characterized as a place where Gazans could never leave. That's completely false. Tens of thousands of Palestinians, anyone can find this on Google in a matter of seconds, were authorized to work in Israel up until October 7th. And when some of those people who were authorized to work in Israel actually attacked the very communities where they were authorized to work. I reject the notion that this is a question of economics or a question of art classes with or what have you. I wish it were so simple, honestly. And that gets into my second point. We didn't talk even for a second about the dozens and dozens of Israelis killed by Hezbollah in this war, or the war with Hezbollah at all, which has been a massive war. We haven't talked about the missile attacks on Israel from Yemen, There's a lot missing from this conversation, unfortunately, which is necessary context to understand the fact that when it boils down to it, and this is the key point, this is not an Israeli-Palestinian issue. This is a ring of radical Islamic countries, mostly Sunni, but a couple Shia, who have actually worked assiduously to wipe Israel off the map. And I think until you address the fact that this is the underlying problem, the underlying fact of the conflict, you won't get anywhere in general with the Palestinians or with any of Israel's adversaries. So what I would like is a recognition of this reality and stronger acknowledgement of Israel's necessary self-defense actions against Hamas, against all the terrorists that have attacked it literally from day one of its existence. And my third point, I would say I want to see Palestinian peace and prosperity and success just as much as the next guy, if not more. I have nothing against the Palestinians, generally speaking. I am sure that many, if not most, are great people who I hope seek peace. Unfortunately, their leadership has not only thrown away their own people's lives, the altar of some mythical cause, which they could have easily attained in the 1990s when Israel offered them a state, but turned down. But unfortunately, future generations as well, I'm afraid. And I hope the Palestinians get new leadership because it's sorely needed. And I would say that's the most concrete next step for peace. But broadly speaking, I think also letting Israel defend itself would go a long way towards actually something resembling peace with the Palestinians. And so long as terrorists are able to permeate Palestinian society, unfortunately, I'm afraid that peace is going to be a long ways away. And I want to thank you both again.
No, thank you both. I know there's a lot we didn't get into with other Israeli and Middle Eastern issues. We'll have to have you two back on sometime to dive further into it. There's a ton of subject matter there. So thanks for keeping it on Israel and Palestine today. And I wanted to once again thank you both for coming on tonight. Debates are going to get contentious, but you guys really exemplified what I think a constructive but engaging debate can look like, where everybody comes away having learned something from the other. And
thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you both. And nice to meet you, Truth.
And a special thank you as well to our audience members for watching and providing their opinions in the chat. Lastly, make sure to tune in to our next debate in just 2 short weeks, where we'll explore another exciting topic with 2 more exciting creators. Follow us on X, TikTok, or Instagram at Politics TV to keep up to date with all the events we're hosting and for progress on the launch of the all-new platform. Thank you to everyone who helped out with this debate, especially our production guy. And with that, good night, everyone. Thanks, Socrates.
Yeah, thank you.
It's great having you on. I think you guys had a pretty good discussion. What do you think?
Yeah, I really appreciate the format of this. I felt like there's a lot of space for good back and forth, but also as much as we were kind of like running up against time in the topics, I think it was good that we shifted. I think that helped reset the conversation a few times in a useful way.
Yeah, I tried to move it along, but not so much. And I think the dialectic part was good. Obviously, I think the reason why you proposed that, right, because it's very hard to ask questions of other people and not want to say so much, right? I think that's a very good just kind of mental philosophical exercise. So thanks for suggesting that. We're definitely going to incorporate that into some more in the future. And
excellent. Yeah.
Offer still stands. So
Socratic everything.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Have a good night.
Yeah. Take care.